Well, if you have been following along with me, you may have noticed I often try to connect with the annual pastor's report that I give. Our fiscal year is June 1st to May 31st. So middle to late June, I give some type of pastor's report and of a direction of where are we going? Where is God calling us? And so the last 2 weeks and this week are connecting back to that. Whether you remember that or not, I want to make sure you recognize or know that I know I've already talked about some of these things before, so you're not thinking I'm losing my mind. But so we're going to look at Ezekiel chapter 47 today, because 2 weeks ago we talked about eliminating every excuse. And last week we talked about how obedience overcomes every obstacle. And because we pastors have to be really cheesy, we love these alliterations, but the reality is alliterations help us remember, right? I mean, the last couple of weeks, Edwin's gotten on stage and talked about how we eliminate excuses and has found ways around it. But well, that's not the point. But remember it. And so this one today is probably the cheesiest. But I think once you go down the rabbit hole, you got to commit. Okay. All right. So it's the trickle from the temple transforms the tainted. Okay, but we're going to get there in Ezekiel chapter 47 and see where Ezekiel is going and what he's calling us to. And so we're going to start with the first two verses of Ezekiel chapter 47. It says, "The man brought me back to the entrance of the temple, and I saw water coming out from under the threshold of the temple toward the east, for the temple faced the east. The water was coming down from under the south side of the temple, south of the altar. He then brought me out the north gate, led me around the outside to the east gate, and the water was trickling from the south side." So this is the last vision that Ezekiel has in his book. If we're honest, Ezekiel is probably one of the least known books. It's not one of those books that people talk about frequently, or about this story, or this passage, or this concept. One, it's a really long book. And some of those Old Testament prophecies just don't seem to be as accessible to us from what's going on here or what's happening. But the book of Ezekiel, one of the things it does is it shows the desolate nature of reality. Israel and Judah have been destroyed and deported and exiled by Babylon in Syria. And so the landscape is desolate. Israel is no longer ruling the promised land, and so they are struggling from an emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual standpoint. They are desolate. And so we see this in the book of Ezekiel. Now, he talks about how the temple faced east. Sometimes we do things not knowing the significance of it. Like the temple, churches traditionally used to face east because the sun rises in the east and Jesus is returning in the east. Now, that doesn't mean we have to adjust our sanctuary and do something different with that. But sometimes our posture maybe it maybe not make a big deal in our life, but it speaks to things. And so the way we organize our church or structure it, and whether it's the furniture, it speaks to who Jesus is. We have a steeple because we're wanting people to focus upwards and focus on God. That's part of the purpose of the steeple. But the temple faced the east. But he says that there's trickle from the temple. The trickle was coming down from the south side. Some of your versions may say the water was coming from the south side, was flowing, or something of that nature. But the version I came with was that it was trickling from the south side. So it was not very much water, but it was enough to notice. It wasn't just a drip, but it wasn't gushing either. It was water, it was a steady stream, not a lot, but some. See, that's where the trickle from the temple, where we see that. But then we get into verse 3, and we see things are starting to change. See, as the man that was giving Ezekiel the vision, as he was moving eastward with a measuring line in hand, he measured off 1,000 cubits, and then led Ezekiel through water that was ankle deep. He measured off another 1,000 cubits, and led him through water that was knee deep. He measured off another 1,000 cubits, and led him through water that was waist deep. He let him measure off another 1,000 cubits, but now it was a river he could not cross because the water had risen and it was deep enough to swim in, a river no one could cross. So I'm sure you all are familiar with the how you move 1,000 cubits into feet, right? You guys already know that. That's common knowledge. So the best estimate we can find is about 1,000 cubits equals 1,700 feet. So it's a significant distance. We're talking about over a quarter of a mile. The quarter of a mile down the road, it was ankle deep. Over another quarter mile down the road, it was knee deep, and then waist deep, and then it was too deep for him to cross because it was a river that you could swim in. See, all this stemmed from the trickle from the temple. This rushing water, this ankle, knee, waist, and then a river that no one could cross came from this small amount of water from the temple. And honestly, as we're reading this story, or this vision, it's kind of like, what's going on here? What's happening? Because we read, okay, water's getting deeper, and we're like, why is this significance? Why is this something that matters? Why was this something that Ezekiel had a vision about? What was God getting to? Well, I think what happened, and we're gonna move on here into verse 6. We focus so much on the water, which is really, really important. But in order to see the why, we have to take a step back. And so in verse 6, what the man that was taking Ezekiel around in the vision, he said to Ezekiel, "Do you see this?" Then he led me, Ezekiel is saying, then he led me back to the bank of the river. When I arrived there, I saw a great number of trees on both sides of the river. He said to me, "This water flows toward the eastern region and goes down into the Arabah where it enters the Dead Sea. When it empties into the sea, the salt water becomes fresh. Swarms of living creatures will live wherever the water flows. There will be a large number of fish because the water flows there and makes the salt water fresh. So wherever the river flows, everything will live. Fishermen will stand along the shore. From Engadi to Englaim, there will be room for casting nets. The fish will be of all kinds, like the fish of the Mediterranean Sea. But the swamps and marshes will not become fresh. They will be left for salt. Fruit trees of all kinds will grow on both banks of the river. Their leaves will not wither, nor their fruit fail. Every month they will bear fruit, because the water from the sanctuary flows to them. Their fruit will serve for food, and their leaves for healing." So I liked verse 6, the question of the man says to Ezekiel, "Do you see this?" Because sometimes we get so caught up in that really small focused thing right in front of us that we need to take a step back and say, do we see this? Do we see all of the results of what God is doing? Because we got this trickle from the temple, and we're trying to figure out how it works. Now, we've spent time in the church doing that, right? We get results, and God does a powerful thing, and we spend more time figuring out how it worked and how it happened than the fact that it just happened and celebrating it. See, the man tells Ezekiel to take a step back, because we get to this, and what we see is that there's death to life. The book of Ezekiel has all this desolate nature of reality. You may remember early in the book, in chapter 37, it talks about the dry bones becoming, having flesh and coming to life, and God doing that vision and miracle. So the people are living in a really difficult situation. They are mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually exhausted. They don't know what's going on because the Assyrians and Babylonians have destroyed them. They have no power left. They have no authority left. They seem to have no hope. But the Dead Sea was contaminated, and now it is clean. You may be familiar, the Dead Sea has such a high concentration of salt that nothing lives there. No plant or vegetable life or plant life lives there. But because this water from the temple flows there, this vision says it will be clean. It will make the salt water fresh. But really what it's saying is not that it's going to take all the salt out. It's going to purify it. It's going to make it clean. Because we know in our world, plants and animals can live in salt water. There's plenty of life in the ocean. So this is about cleansing and purification and the life-giving application that is happening. And so the fish are going to be there too, all kinds of fish, like the fish of the Mediterranean Sea. And the fish show that there is life, but they also provide sustenance. They provide life for others. Now, some of the fish are vegetarians, I'm sorry, they're not vegetarians. They're herbivores, sorry. Some are carnivores and eat other fish, other animals. And so we have both. But fish show that there is life, and then they provide life to others at the same time. So what we see is that there is a balanced ecosystem. When there is imbalance, the ecosystem struggles. Plants and animals struggle to survive. Some get out of control and oppress the others, and they can't live and thrive. But we see there's balance here. That God has created order and structure by purifying and cleansing that which was dead and is now bringing it to life and giving it life. Not just life in a moment, but he's giving it life that sustains the life. It's maintained and sustained in life. But the swamps and marshes remain salty. I think that was an interesting concept. Now, partially swamps and marshes, water doesn't flow. It just kind of sits there. And so some of it may be the water's not flowing there, so it's not cleansing and purifying it. But on another level, our creation needs salt in order to live. Right? If you don't have any salt in your body, you aren't going to live. Like if you have too much or too little, that's a big deal. And so we need access to salt. We need to be able to get salt somehow, in some way. And so we see that there is salt that is left there. The swamps and marshes are left for salt. But the fruit trees constantly bear fruit. So this is not some agricultural advancement. It shows that how God is restoring life. Now, we don't know too much about the Garden of Eden. When God created them, Adam and Eve were in the Garden of Eden, and there was life there. They had everything they needed in order to survive. But we get the imagery that God is restoring life to how it was before sin. Now, we don't know when this vision is going to take place. Right? God is giving Ezekiel this vision, and it's not one of those things where we know when this is going to happen or if this is something that is a promise going to happen there literally in Israel. But it's a reminder that because of sin, we live in a world that's destructive. But when God purifies and cleanses us from the contamination of sin, life happens, trees will bear fruit, and we will be able to live in a world as God intended it. And the leaves were also used for medicinal purposes, that God is giving life. He's also providing restoration. Now remember, all this is possible because of the trickle from the temple. Just a little bit. Not much, but enough to notice. But so I brought a few things here to see if we can't maybe help illustrate this somewhat. And once I pull out this first thing, I think you're going to know where it's going to go. But so I've got this squirt ball. This just has water in it. It used to be stain remover stuff, but it's empty now. So if it gets on your clothes, don't worry. It's good for it. But so we got, sometimes our water, we just have a spray. It doesn't really do anything, right? Right? Okay, maybe we get a little... Oh, no, it doesn't reach us. Right? Anybody get wet? Okay, all right, just curious. So, yes. Now, I will say we have to be careful when we talk about this type of stuff because where you're sitting in the sanctuary isn't necessarily important. Where you're sitting in the room. But sometimes our physical posture and location has spiritual ramifications. I'm not condemning you for sitting in the back. That's not my point today. But to recognize that we want to be closer to Jesus. I hope you do at least, right? Now you can sit in the front row and be really far from Jesus. Don't get me wrong. You can be in the back row and be closer to Jesus than anybody else in the room. So I'm talking about what is my physical posture saying about me spiritually, if anything? Because we see that there's things that are tainted. We see that we come to Ezekiel and we see that this land was desolate. There was nothing there. There was just a little water coming from the temple. And honestly, if we're probably reading this story critically before we get to the end, we're like, somebody should fix that leak. Right? Right? If there's water trickling in my house, we want to fix that leak. We want to get rid of it. Nobody says, God will take care of it. I mean, he can, but he's probably going to be like, this one's on you. You're qualified to fix this, or know somebody who can. But when we think about all that's happening here, I have a few points I want to mention. I want to come back to the trickle. The amount is a trickle. We always have to remember that. It's not very much, but it is enough to notice. Now, we know that the amount doesn't matter if God is in it. It doesn't. God doesn't worry about the amounts that we can measure by our worldly standards. See, if God has a little bit, he might as well have everything. See, God doesn't need billions and billions of dollars to do his purposes. He can do it with no money. But he chooses to work through us, and sometimes that takes resources and energy and time. It takes all those things. But God's power multiplies beyond measure. So we can't necessarily quantify God's power and God's movement. Now, there's an old-time phrase that I really enjoy that kind of ties into this. It's the phrase, under the spout where the glory pours out. And I don't know if anybody's heard that, but it might be a specific regional thing. I don't know. But the point is that I want to be under the place where God is pouring out his blessing, his spirit, his power. Under the spout where the glory pours out. That's where I want to be. We want that. We want this water that God is giving. We want this trickle from the temple to transform the taintedness of our lives. Because we're not perfect. You have not arrived. You still have work that you need to do in your life. But sometimes it takes a while. And it took Ezekiel and the man a while to, I assume they were walking the whole distance, so it took them a little bit of a while, and they were measuring it too, so that probably made it a little bit longer. But the 1,000 cubits and 1,000 cubits, the 4,000 cubits essentially, comes out, I said it was 1,700 feet, so a little over a quarter mile, but when you actually add all four together, you're around a mile and a quarter. Right? That's the distance that they travel, that this trickle from the temple, as it started, it got bigger and bigger and bigger. Because a mile and a quarter down the road, to put it in perspective, if you go down on Mason Road, right at the curve right there by the airport, that's about a mile and a quarter. A lot of you live that direction. Some of you, it's like, one of you is like right to your house right there. But if you go to the Recplex by the road, not how the crow flies, you go on the road, it's about a mile and a quarter. Can you imagine getting a garden hose and waiting to see how long it would take for that hose to make a rushing river by the time we got a mile and a quarter down the road? I don't even know if it's possible, right? But that's the distance that we're talking about. So it takes a little bit of time to get there. But God is reversing things. We have a reversal of things that God is doing. Salt water becomes fresh. It doesn't become brackish water. It doesn't just lower the salinity of the water. The salt water becomes fresh. The impure becomes pure. That is what Ezekiel is communicating, that which is contaminated is no longer contaminated. It is 100% clean and pure. The water is no longer unclean. It can bring life and support life and give life. The water has been purified, which shows us that God can purify that which is contaminated. I don't know how you get rid of salt and salt water. I'm sure there's a process that can be done. But see, God can enter into this world, interact with things that are contaminated, purify them without God being contaminated himself. So God can take our life that is a mess, or that's living in sin or contrary to him, and he can make us clean. But remember, this all comes from the trickle from the temple. That's what Ezekiel is writing about, because he's writing about life, that we have fish. Fish are there. And fish shows that there's life. The situation has changed because of the influence of the temple. Not because of the building, but because of the power of God that came from it. But I want to remind you today, the fish are not the miracle. The fish are evidence of the miracle. And it makes me think, in many ways, I'm not the miracle. I'm evidence of the miracle. I'm evidence of what Jesus can do in this world. Right? So we go out in this world, and because it's not up to you. Hopefully that relieves some of the pressure. It's not up to you to make yourself pure. Now, we have a responsibility. You have a responsibility to honor Jesus, to follow him, and to live your life for him. But you cannot make yourself pure. Only Jesus can make yourself pure. See, we're getting into this concept called holiness, where God cleanses us and takes away that bent nature towards non-Jesus. Takes away that bent nature towards sinful nature and replaces it with his Spirit. That's what Ezekiel is writing about, that the fish aren't the miracle, they're the evidence of the miracle. And isn't it exciting to walk around this world knowing that I'm not responsible for the miracle, but because of the grace and power of Jesus, I get to show people that the miracle is possible. That's what's being communicated here. But you know what? This just doesn't cut it, right? It doesn't. Some of you get nervous. You already know where I'm going, so don't even. We got some of these, right? I've been real tempted to just walk down the aisle and get the people in the back first. But, yeah, hey, Lori, if you want to sit on the other side of Ken, I promise I will not squirt you. Because the only people off limits are infants that are sleeping, because nobody wins if they get squirted, right? All right? I mean, but I've wondered, I wondered, we got this wonderful group right here. I think sometimes we treat you like you're this fragile individual that can't handle a joke. Oh, you are? So here's the thing. Let's see if it works. Did I get you, Kelsey? Okay. All right. So I'm. So we got wet, right? Some of you wonder if I actually was going to do it. I had that build up to it a little bit, but as I think about these squirt guns, I hope when we come to church, we feel that there's something different. And not that we only have to come to a formalized religious activity that's sponsored by a group like the church in order to experience Jesus, but like Jesus wants to do something in your life. I hope we're here today being influenced by whatever's coming out of the holiness of God. So that's what's being represented here. It's coming out, the water's coming out of the temple. It's coming out of the holiness of God. It's coming towards us. So I hope when we're here today, we are being impacted by the holiness of God. And maybe this water, maybe it, here, I'll get this group right here a lot. So, but, yep, asking for forgiveness, not permission. But there were some exceptions, right? We have the marshes and the swamps that had salt in it, and it was one of those things where we need salt, and I honestly don't exactly know what to do with that particular part of how do we apply that to our lives. We need salt, but if we're talking about contamination versus purity, I'm not sure if we don't allow the river to flow to us and through us, then we're going to remain in a contaminated state. Because marshes and swamps, water just sits there. And Jesus wants to purify you, but he can't purify you if you don't let him. By that I mean if you just sit there and do nothing. if you just sit complacently in your situation, Jesus can't purify you. He wants to do something more. You see, we die when we have imbalance, and we need balance of Jesus in our life. But then we have the trees, and the trees produce in abundance. And I love the concept that God gives according to his abundance, not out of his abundance. See, if we can use this with money, if somebody has $1 billion and they give you $2, they are not giving you according to their abundance. They might be giving out of their abundance-ish. I mean, it's hard to say it's out of it. But if they gave you $1 million, that is according to their abundance. They have a lot, and they're going to give you a lot. If someone has like $2 to their name and they give you $2, that's a big deal. Right? So God's not stingy. That's the point. God gives out of his abundance and according to his abundance. He does that for us. But then he provides restoration. You know, the healing nature of the leaves. See, these trees, their leaves never wither and their fruit never fail because the water from the temple flows to them. Not because we figured something out, not because we have the best spiritual practices that have ever existed, not because we're better than somebody else, but we will never wither or fail if we are connected to the water that flows from the temple. That's what Jesus is calling us to. Say, connect yourself to me. Continue to be exposed and drink in the water from the temple. Means we need to continue to be exposed and allow ourselves to be covered by the holiness of God. God is pouring that out upon us. And he's saying, don't stop. This is not about you being better. It's about you allowing me more and more in your life. That's what God wants to do to you. And sometimes we have hurts. Sometimes we have bruises. Sometimes we make a mistake. Sometimes our hurts are because somebody hurt us. Sometimes our hurts are because we've made mistakes. But God is providing healing to us. The point is not for you to be perfect in every way, shape, or form and have no issues whatsoever. The point is that God says, I have provided everything you need. Just come back to me. Allow the holiness that flows from God to be soaked in your life. That is what he is calling us. God provides a way for you to be restored. There are many instances in Scripture where we have the question of what happens if we mess up? What happens if we sin? What happens if we reject God? And God says, if that happens, do this. God provides a way for us to get back to him because God wants a relationship with you. God doesn't want you to live in condemnation. He doesn't want you to live in shame. He wants you to live in the life-giving life that he gives. That's what he wants for you. But sometimes it's a little uncomfortable, particularly when we have our old sinful ways that are trying to stay into our lives. We got these habits over here that are really hard to kick. I've got this addiction that I just don't know how to let go of. And God says, come to me. He says, come to me. Now, we need to pause for a moment. I've heard stories before where someone was addicted to something like cigarettes, and they laid that on the altar, and all of a sudden it was gone. And they had that moment, and we're saying, yes, praise God. I've heard a lot of stories of people saying, I laid my cigarettes on the altar 30, 40, 50, 60 times before I was finally able to let go of that addiction. So my point is to say, just because you're not as you don't have as instantaneous of a transformation in something as somebody else doesn't mean you're a failure. Right? I want to make sure we're clear on that. God can do it, but sometimes it's a really difficult process on our end. It's not difficult for God. And sometimes God allows us to go through difficulties to teach us, to help us to grow for various reasons. But it's always uncomfortable. Right? It always gets uncomfortable. And so, let's see. We got one of these now, huh? Yeah. Maybe I need to scoot back and get more in the back here for some of these backseat Christians. I don't know, right? And it's leaking too. I did not break this. It's leaking, by the way. So I don't. but I mean, like, do we use this? Do we allow the Spirit to impact us that much? Do we allow Jesus to move into our lives and make us that uncomfortable? Because right now, all y'all are uncomfortable. And maybe uncomfortable might be the wrong word, but you're maybe a little worried, anxious. You're not sure what's going to happen. Is he actually going to do this? Is it going to get me wet? I don't know. And there's some people in the back that are really wanting it back there. See? So I didn't get Ruth, did I? Okay, all right. So I want to respect the infants in the room. So, So God wants to do this in our lives. He wants to transform us. But one of the things I think we have to remember is that Jesus is the Alpha and the Omega. He is the beginning and the end, which means he is the goal. He is where we come from. Read John 1 and Colossians 1, that all things were created through him and nothing was created without him. Jesus is he's the beginning. He's our source. But he is also our end and the goal. He is what we are striving towards. We are moving towards Jesus, not both literally and, both spiritually and physically. We're moving towards him. It's getting closer to the day where Jesus returns. But hopefully, in the meantime, we are getting closer to Jesus in our relationship, in our spiritual growth and development, and all that he wants to do in us. Jesus is that. But see, the abundance of God that he wants to produce in your life often starts small. It starts with that little trickle from the temple. But if you go a little while, it becomes ankle deep. Then it gets knee deep. Then it gets waist deep. Then it gets all-consuming. That's what the river is. It's all-consuming. You can't cross it. You are all in, 100% without exception. Give of yourself completely to Jesus. And that's when the purification really takes root in your life. But here's my concern. I wonder how many people come to something like church to get a dose of Jesus. And they're going to come back next week for another dose of Jesus. And that's really about all the Jesus that they have. And that's all the Jesus they've committed to. Because at least the ones that got wet with this, you're already dry. And if all you came was to have a little dose of Jesus, you're going to be dry really, really quickly, without exception. Jesus doesn't want to just get you a little damp. He doesn't want to just inconvenience you just for a moment and have a little fun, laughing moment here in church. He wants to do a radical work in your life. Not just 20 years ago, not 40 years ago, not even just last year. He wants to work in your life and do powerful things in it right here, right now. But it requires that we allow ourselves to get all in with Jesus. That is your responsibility. Your responsibility is not to control what Jesus does or the power that he pours out upon you. Your responsibility is to say, Jesus, I need you. I'm coming to you. Take this away from me. Cleanse this. I am contaminated in this way because I need the trickle from the temple to transform the tainted. I need that. We all need that. You never get to a point where Jesus is done with you. So I hope we all recognize while we may be at different spots in our journey with Jesus, somebody who's been following Jesus faithfully for decades still needs Jesus. Somebody who just decided to follow Jesus still needs Jesus. So there's no hierarchy. There's no level of, well, you need Jesus more than I do. We all need Jesus. We need Jesus to do this. And if all we are is allowing Jesus to give us a little dose of himself, and then we go do our own thing, and we come back for another little dose, then we go do our own thing, we're going to be dry people. We're going to be spiritually dry people living in the same context that Ezekiel was, where we are desolate. But if you want to experience a life-giving thing of Jesus, then you've got to allow what's coming from God to be poured out in your life. You know, we believe there's this passage in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, 22 and 23. May the God himself, or may the God of peace, sanctify you through and through. The one who calls you is faithful, and he will do it. If you come to Jesus, there is a promise in Scripture that he is going to pour himself out on you. Not just a little bit. He is going to consume you. Are you willing to do that today? Are you willing to come to Jesus and say, Jesus, I don't want this contaminated part or parts of my life anymore. I need you to come change me. I need you to come purify me. I need you to do a work in my life right here, right now. Now, it's not an ultimatum. It's not you're coming and putting God in a box, but it's saying, God, you have promised to do this, and I desperately need you to do this. Are you willing to do that today? Because the invitation is open.